Welcome to Creative in Tech, a podcast show powered by ReadSpeaker AI. I am your host, Carrie Roberts. I am the brand evangelist of North America for ReadSpeaker. And this show is all about highlighting various brands and organizations that are creatively using one of the most up-and-coming technologies out there right now, which is conversational AI. And in this first series of conversations, we're going to be focusing on the banking and financial area, where we talk about how they're utilizing conversational AI in a creative and innovative way to help create the next generation of customer strategy. And joining me today for this discussion is Jason Fields. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Voicify, a company providing brands and organizations with the ability to create engaging conversational-based apps in one location that automatically deploys to various platforms. So welcome, Jason. So excited to have you here.
Me too. Thanks for having me, Carrie.
So before we get into all of this as a whole, I want to ask you personally, what is it that excites you about this space, about conversational AI? What is it that you love about it most?
I think for me, the thing that excites me the most is that it feels like sort of a new frontier. Coming up in the age of digital, the web and the internet became very popular when I was in college, and the IRC chat rooms and websites and all of that sort of was born in those formative years for me. And I've been engaged with it ever since and got really passionate about the idea of customer experience and what digital can do for that as a sort of connective tissue between brands and consumers, that operates in a way that's not just sell, sell, sell. The way that translates into voice and conversational AI is really, really powerful. When you look at sort of the arc of the way we've communicated with one another and with brands, we're actually going back to where it started, which is having a conversation with our voices. And so the idea of this now being possible from sort of an automated or augmented or technical standpoint with voice and AI, it really just piques my interest. So I had to get involved.
Yes, and you work with a variety of verticals, but today we are focusing on this kind of banking and finance space. Can you share a little bit kind of an overview and kind of higher level view of where you see the banking and finance industry going, and especially in terms of conversational AI?
Yeah, I think that in order to understand, I'm a big proponent of sort of looking backwards to see what might be coming. And so when you look back at where banking and FinServ started, they were actually some of the earliest adopters of internet and digital technologies. You look back at like 1981 is when the first New York City banks actually started testing out in-home banking, and it was for their elite customers, and they were actually connecting TVs to phones in order to allow people to like transfer money between accounts. So they've always been early adopters, maybe sometimes even before consumers were ready for it, as is that case, because in 1981, none of us had really good computers that we could start working with. But they've helped sort of create a formative process for consumers to get on board with new technology. So they helped us all get comfortable with online banking. They started abstracting uses for hardware that were not sort of easily accepted by the consumer base, but eventually were. I'm thinking of like their use of the camera on a phone in order to deposit checks. If you told my grandmother to do that, she would have, "Are you kidding me? I'm not taking a picture of my check and saying no and texting it to someone." But we've become more and more comfortable with it. So the idea that banks and FinServ are on the sort of leading edge of this and allowing us to get comfortable, I think is a really important facet to see over the course of history to let them influence what's coming. So when you look at things that are already happening right now, I mean, that the easiest go-to example right now is Bank of America. They've got their own custom bot with Erica, which of course is the last four letters of America, as I just figured out for the first time a few weeks ago. And they're doing a lot of really interesting things with that. But they're not the only ones. You look at like U.S. Bank, Eastern Bank, even First Hawaiian, right? First Hawaiian is a regional bank. They're not a global brand. People in Yugoslavia are not banking with First Hawaiian Bank, but First Hawaiian Bank has an Alexa skill that allows people to look up their balances, to transfer money. You can enroll in certain programs with them by having a conversation. So there are a lot of different ways that banks and FinServ are starting to sort of splinter out and figure out what their brand, what their consumer bases are comfortable with.
Yeah, I think those are really good examples. And like you said, it's interesting because there are things we never thought of. I use the take a picture of your check and deposit all the time. And if you had asked me that 5 years ago, I probably would have said, no, I don't feel
Right.
comfortable. So we are getting more comfortable with these new technologies over time. Can you share with us maybe any research that you've seen or maybe your company has done, or even with your own clients, of how people are responding to conversational AI in the banking and finance space? Do they like it? Do they want it? What are they using it for? Any research or data here that you can share?
Yeah, the answer is I think banks probably are still leading the horse to water a little bit. They understand that they're in a highly sensitive industry. We're dealing with people's finances, but once people understand that it's easier, and this is tried and true for voice overall, it's not just about this industry. Once people understand that the amount of friction in their conversation or their transaction with an institution or a brand is going to be easier by talking to them, it becomes a no-brainer. Mobile apps were difficult for people to get on board with at first. Buying something through Instagram became awkward for people in the beginning. But as they became more comfortable with it, they adopted it rather quickly. And we're seeing that trajectory as well, sort of that old technology curve that we were all taught in school, right? But the number one thing, and you talk about research, that there's a desire for consumers to be helped. And so we counsel our customers to be useful. Jay Baer wrote a book years ago called Utility, YO Utility, that sort of like one of the Bibles on my shelves for me personally. And if you're going to do something with your consumer, it needs to be of value. It needs to be of utility to them, right? But to the brand, it becomes more about owning the space. So you have to find that sort of cross section in that Venn diagram of what's valuable to the brand and what's valuable to the consumer, and that's where we try, and our agency partners try to help the customers of Voicify figure out what's what. There was a research piece that was put out by Opus Research in February of this year, and they surveyed about 350 global brands across a number of different industries, and they asked the question of, what's the most important reason, business value, that you're getting involved in voice or conversation. And at a whopping 83% across all industries, it was convenience and speed. Now, it's worth saying that there was a half a dozen to a dozen reasons that brands were getting involved in voice, according to the survey. The lowest percentage response at 56% was revenue generation. So these global brands weren't even looking to voice to be a commerce play out the gate. Of course, it will be, and sophisticated brands have sophisticated attribution models. So if you're doing something right in convenience and speed and operational efficiencies, it's going to necessarily translate to either revenue generation through retention or new customer acquisition. But those weren't the primary reasons that the brands were getting involved. And within the FinServ space on the whole, when asked what the importance of a consistent experience across devices, products, and channels were, 94% of all of the respondents in FinServ said it was the most important reason that they were getting involved. You don't want a voice assistant like Alexa or Google to own your brand in any way, shape, or form. You want to own it yourself. And the way you do that is by creating a voice app. And that's the one thing that I think Bank of America may end up having to deal with in the near future. They have Erica, it lives inside of their mobile app. Their CMO is well quoted saying this is the first mile of a long stretch in voice for us. Like, they're big believers, 10 million users, huge numbers for them, and they're doing it very well. But if I think as a consumer to engage Alexa or Google Assistant or Bixby or a chatbot somewhere with Bank of America, what I'm getting is their version of what they think Bank of America wants to give me. Well, Alexa is not as sort of well put together from a data standpoint as Google Assistant is, so you're going to get a lot of Wikipedia information. That's a broken experience. And Google Assistant, although very good at indexing, and it has all of the other conglomerate companies inside of Alphabet at its disposal, is still largely reading out what's on websites. So you really have to own that third-party space. And it can be obviously a strategic and conscious choice to include or exclude whatever channels you want, but you need to have something there from a brand standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We talk all the time. There's this term, for those that don't know, voice first. But it's also kind of voice everywhere. It's not just on a smart speaker, and it's not just on your own mobile app. Like you said, it has to be able to be available through third parties if you want that option, through your website, potentially in the car. There are so many different places. The idea, as you mentioned earlier, is so that you are creating a good customer experience while also standing out as a brand. So there's multiple things at play here.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the use cases or some of the clients, to whatever extent you can, that you've worked with, and kind of how you've helped them develop something for their bank or financial institution?
Yeah, so we have a number of banking and FinServe customers, and by and large, our counsel to them is to think big but start small. And so even transacting or like shifting money from one account to another is sort of on the near horizon for a lot of our customers, but not exactly where they wanted to start. And the reason being is not that it isn't technically possible, but it's that they need to gain muscle memory internally in order to learn how to use this channel correctly. So
what does that mean? Can you break that down a little bit?
sure. I mean, it takes time and energy to manage a channel, right? And so if you have existing employees that are going to be responsible for this, all of a sudden making them responsible for mission critical transfer $2 from savings to checking, that's a high bar. It's not as high a bar, but it's as much or even more marketable if you take like a first time home buyer program and you take that onboarding process and you start it online and you start it with voice, right? So in that welcome packet to you just got a mortgage with us, maybe it's, hey, if you have frequently asked questions, you're interested in learning X, Y, and Z, talk to us through Alexa or Google Assistant, and we'll have essentially a personality or a character of our bank walk you through the process of doing things. And it becomes not exactly an ADA compliance benefit, but you're helping people learn and cognitively process things related to your brand in a way that may be easier for them. We all know when we deal with the banking industry, when we want to do certain things or learn about certain programs, it can be tedious to read through all of that. It'd be a whole lot easier if I could talk to somebody, but I don't really want to call an 800 call center. And maybe now I don't even want to go into a branch. If I can have that conversation when it's convenient for me, when I'm in my car, driving an hour to my parents' house, oh, this is a good time to catch up on that conversation about the mortgage approval with so-and-so bank, So a lot of the use cases that we're seeing with our existing customers is starting out with more of a marketing channel for a few reasons. One is they have the content there, so it's easily accessible and it's easily repurposable into voice. Secondarily, it gives the team a level of familiarity with content and purpose that they can then repurpose over the voice and have a higher level of confidence and get that muscle memory around managing the channel.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that even as you kind of mentioned, this kind of muscle memory on the team. So even if you have team players in your company running things, agencies like Voicify, like ReadSpeaker, you have people there to help you, to answer questions, to kind of guide you through, to have people that are experts in this area and kind of train you and teach you to make this work for you. So it's not like you're just building it and then saying, you're on your own. You're kind of working through, which is really nice to hear. One of the things that I have said to you, I said before the show, you're an extremely creative person yourself, and you always have these wonderful ideas. And I would love for you, if you could, either off the top of your head or maybe you've thought about this, that maybe like some other ways that banks or financial institutions or accounting or anything that kind of has to do with money in some capacity could be thinking about conversational AI that maybe they haven't thought of. Because one of the challenges is sometimes we can't see something unless we understand how it might fit for us. Do you have any kind of ideas of ways that, hey, have you thought about it this way that might help an organization?
Yeah, I think the really exciting place for the banking and FinServe industry to play is to get the blocking and tackling done around move money from here to there. This is all, I hate to say it this way, but it's sort of low-hanging fruit. All the technical capabilities are there. If I'm transferring something on my mobile app, why shouldn't I be able to just tell it with my voice? And that's largely what Bank of America did, right? They took a lot of custom functionality that had been built out for one channel or medium and made it work in another. But I think that the real opportunity is taking that what I'm told by my parents and grandparents was the banking experience of their generation, where your banker was a trusted confidant in planning for life. where they were giving you advice and counsel on the regular in order to understand what you should be doing to plan for your future. I think there's the ability to bring a lot of that back into the modern day consumer experience. So think about, and you see banks like Citibank, they cared about offering a lot of benefits to their consumers. They started a whole, and this is not an example per se, but they started a whole sort of events and concert series because they wanted to bring this like, hey, we're here to help you live life. I think there's a lot of those opportunities for the banking industry to come in and do, whether it is helping with specific advice or counsel around the family time. I don't think it all has to be specifically geared towards dollars and cents, although having a tie back to that value, I think certainly would be beneficial for a lot of brands. I think that really moving in that direction of being a trusted counselor is where I see a lot of the opportunity for the banking industry.
Yeah, I like that. That actually makes me think of just like retirement and investments. How many people are confused, and how can you kind of use conversational AI to have an initial conversation that eventually could be a lead generator to your financial advisors or team. But it starts with, like you said, just kind of this basic education, someone to help you with your finances, because people definitely need that overall.
Yeah. Well, and just as another quick example, Carrie, we have a customer who has a relationship with the end consumer, but is typically engaged with by another company in order to manage a lot of assets for their workforce. And in order to support that conversation from a marketing standpoint, they put together a series of different quizzes and questionnaires. Your like mortgage calculator just reminded me of it, because they're doing something very similar. Because sometimes it's easier to talk through that process than it is to key a bunch of information into your mobile or your desktop. But where we're working with them is the only reason I'm not sharing the brand, because I don't want to sort of give up their momentum. But one of the directions that they're really considering going right now is actually taking their conversational support, not just within voice, but also within chatbot, which is something our platform supports. So think about that level of counsel and support if you were to embed your brand inside of your client's workforce's collaboration tool, like a Slack bot or a Microsoft Teams bot. Well, now as the banking institution or as the financial services provider, I'm helping an entire workforce in a space that's native to where and how they want to converse about these things. It's sort of a safe place. So maybe they don't want to talk to me on Alexa because they're a little nervous about it. But if there's a Microsoft Teams bot on their computer and they're talking with their HR and their senior leadership and their colleagues all day long on Teams or Slack, and now all of a sudden there's that banking bot that's sitting inside that platform, it makes it easier for them to get comfortable with it. It also is a massive operational efficiencies gain for the brand that put that bot inside of their collaboration tool, because now instead of having 10,000 people hit HR with a bunch of questions every quarter, they actually can ask the bot, which is automated using AI, as well as like a Voicify platform to bring the answers together.
Yeah, and I think again there's this fear across all verticals, and I mentioned it earlier today in another conversation about this idea that, well, is it taking people's jobs? Is it, are we not giving the same customer feel like you described that your grandparents had?
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what you have to say to that, because I always say it's not fully taking away; it's actually enhancing and making it easier and bringing the right conversation. So you're not answering that same simple question, but you're really digging into the deep things that people need. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different points to unpack there. One is every workforce revolution we've gone through in this country had the same argument that it was going to take jobs away. And it's never been the case that we haven't found more work to do as a country or a society. So like, all due respect to that sort of naysayer attitude, I get it, but I just don't think it's going to be the case. Secondarily, yeah, you can have a bad voice experience. I go into a supermarket twice a week and I have a bad customer service experience. So human beings aren't the answer. They're a liability in some cases. So if you do the right planning and organize yourselves correctly as a brand with voice, you actually can gain yards on the experience.
Yeah, and to that note, we've talked before as well, there is so much that goes into creating a voice experience. Sometimes it can seem overwhelming, but again, if you're working with agencies and partners, we help you through it. It
Right.
doesn't have to feel that scary. But to make something, again, you talked about this other piece of, the brand wants to stand out. And so we talk about, these kind of extras, or the cherry on top, as I like to put it. Whether it's something like what we do here at ReadSpeaker, where we create these kind of custom text-to-speech voices, or what a sonic brander does, where they're adding a sound or music to it, or you're adding multiple experiences. Can you talk about how that kind of just levels up and enhances a brand's conversational AI experience?
Yeah, this definitely jumps back into our ongoing modality conversation, right? And I have a really great example of this, but it doesn't have to do with FinServe. So you'll forgive me if I turn our attention to booze, which is the wild turkey bourbon tasting. And it's original, and they used a partner of ours to do it. We supported them obviously as well. In the first iteration of this thing, right? You always go through iterations. In the first iteration of this thing, it was Alexa and Google Assistant's voice telling you what to experience with bourbon as you sipped it. And it was cool. Then the brand decided that they could actually go get the brand ambassadors, which happens to be Matthew McConaughey, as well as the master distillers down in Kentucky, who have really distinctive and delightful sort of Southern drawls in the way that they talk, to actually answer the questions and make it completely conversational. Same content, different modality, right? Then on top of that, there was layers of sonic branding that you mentioned, right? So think of the ideas of ice clinking or a bourbon bottle popping open with a cork for the first taste as you're being instructed on what to do, as well as visual modalities, right? So I do the wild turkey tasting on my flat panel television in my living room, and I get nice big landscapes of the wild turkey tasting room and their barrels and their fields and all of these things about their property that take it from just having an oral conversation that I can listen to and giving me data that I can process and I find valuable, to something that becomes more experiential. So we work even with banking and FinServe customers to help them understand you don't have to be boring. If you want to be, you can choose to be, but you don't have to be boring. But think about how it feels to be transferring money if you're talking to Alexa on your remote control and you're doing it through your television. If you were to see what looked like a teller window, like these are the sorts of little additionals, the leveling up, as you call it, that really enhance that experience.
Yeah, and like you said, it makes a brand stand out. It is, in a sense, kind of this like media experience. Like you said, it could be multimodal, which means that it could be on a visual device, it could be just auditory, it could be sounds. There's a lot of moving pieces, but it's another level of customer experience. And I think you're right. I don't think banking and finance has to feel boring or feel like just numbers or data. There are things that you can add to it to create a great experience. If you had kind of one tip for the banking and finance industry when it comes to conversational AI, what would it be when they're thinking of potentially doing this or kind of leveling up what they have? What's maybe one tip that you'd have for them?
Do it now. I mean, we've all, and it sounds overly simplistic, but we've all learned with technology that failing fast is a benefit to getting into these things early. You don't want to be chasing your competitors in a technology that is very quickly going to start being a value add operationally and from a customer experience standpoint. Get in there, start small, think big, get the feedback. Don't be afraid to be wrong. You'll get it right, and just keep moving the ball forward.
Yeah, and like you said, we weren't 5 years ago taking pictures of checks and depositing, and now we do it all the time.
Right.
So those two things will definitely be coming up. If people have questions about anything we spoke about, where is the best place to learn more or connect?
Yeah, I mean, Voicify.com is definitely the place to go. We actually tomorrow are launching our 3.0 release, so you can start getting some information on a lot of personalization benefits and marketplace benefits that we have. We've also on that homepage, and I'll throw into chat here, there's a financial services reader that we've created that everyone can download for free that we're excited to share. And we've got a webinar coming up later this month on the 26th. All of that's available right on the website.
Perfect. Well, I thank you so much, Jason, for sharing your insight and sharing some examples on our show today.
Thanks for having me, Carrie. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you. And for those of you watching and listening, don't forget to subscribe to our ReadSpeaker AI YouTube channel to catch more live videos. And of course, check out our audio version of the podcast show, Creative and Tech, wherever you listen to podcasts.